Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be looking at the 2026 US Senate map, and we're going to be talking about where things currently stand and some of the latest polling and polling averages and what this could mean for the Democrats' chances of retaking the Senate after the 2026 midterms. Okay, so starting first on the Senate map, there are 35 Senate seats up in 2026. Not counting those 35, Democrats currently hold 34, Republicans hold 31. The current composition of the US Senate, Republicans have 53, Democrats have 47. So in this election cycle, Republicans are defending more Senate seats than the Democrats are. Now, on this map, there are already a pretty good number of seats that could be considered safe for the Democrats and safe for the Republicans. Some of the Democratic ones, which, just to be clear, safe for me in my rankings, is a margin of victory of 15% or more. And almost certainly we're going to see the states of Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, Illinois, Virginia, Delaware, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, all of which are going to go for the Democrats by more than 15 points. That's not very much of a big surprise there. So that puts the Democrats at 43 seats. Now Republicans have some safe states as well. And there are a few that you could argue between being safe or likely or not. So I'm going to leave some of those off, but still, we know Idaho will be safe red, so will Wyoming, South Dakota will be safe, Oklahoma will be safe, Arkansas, Louisiana will be safe, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia all will be 100% safe Republican. Not really any debate in any of those states. Now, there are a good number of states as well that could be considered more likely to be likely Republican than safe, depending on how you want to frame it. For instance, a state like Mississippi, the Democrats aren't going to win Mississippi, but will it be under 15%? There's a pretty strong chance that could happen, so I put Mississippi in this category. I would put Lindsey Graham's Senate race in South Carolina in that category as well. I don't think the Democrats are going to be able to win it, but I think we're going to see South Carolina go under 15%. Kansas, for now, I put in this category as well. I don't think the Democrats, even with Adam Hamilton running, I don't think it's going to be a race that Roger Marshall, the Republican incumbent, will lose. So Kansas, I would put as likely red. Montana, as long as it's Kurt Alme versus both the Democrat, I believe it's Cindy, blanking on her last name, but Cindy, and also Seth Bodnar as well, the independent candidate. As long as both there's an independent and Democrat in this race, I'm not even sure putting it under 15% is really needed. You could argue it's safe Republican with those candidates in the race, but I'll leave it as likely Republican just for the sake of the video. And then I would also put Florida in this category as well. The polls have showed it being more of a competitive race, but Rick Scott just won by like 13, or I think it was 13 or like 11 points in 2024. So even if we're to swing massively to the Democratic side, it should still probably stay above 5% of the vote, which would make it a lean state. So with the likely states out of the way on the Republican side for sure, that gets the Republicans up to 46. Now, the state of Minnesota, I would also put as likely for likely Democrat, but I think it's more likely to be around that like 5 to like 8% margin of victory than like the 12 to 13%. So just want to differentiate that. New Hampshire, the current average or forecast here, I'll show you. This is the PollsMax website. They have Chris Pappas currently with an 82.5% chance to beat John Sununu. They have it at 6.3% for their projected margin. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to put New Hampshire as likely Democrat, like with Minnesota as well, as that's what their forecast currently has. That puts the Democrats at 45, Republicans are at 46. Now you get into some of the states that could be viewed as more competitive. Now, not all of them are going to be the same level as competitiveness, but first we'll start with a state like Nebraska, for instance. Nebraska, this is going to be U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts taking on Dan Osborne, but they do have the margin here under 5% at 4.8% advantage for Ricketts over Osborne in this race. So you can technically put it if it's 5 and under, which is my personal rankings on my predictions. I have a 5% margin of victory or under as toss-up. That's why I wouldn't put New Hampshire in it for this video, because their forecast has it over 5 points. My prediction will probably differ a little bit on that, but for that 4.8% margin, you could put Nebraska as lean for the Republicans. That gets the Republicans up to 47. But you can see a lot of these states here, like Michigan, Ohio, Maine, North Carolina, Georgia, Iowa, Texas, and Alaska. And you can put Nebraska and New Hampshire in here if you want as well. These states are going to be very competitive, and we're going to have to go through each one here and see, because the polling averages and the forecasts here have very tight races. in this. First, let's go to the state of, I think let's start with Georgia. We just know the primary is over. Jon Ossoff versus Mike Collins. They have Ossoff with a 70% chance to win. Just to be clear, they run about 100,000 simulations here, and 70% of them go to Ossoff. Their projected margin currently in this race is 3.3% for Ossoff. They have about a 31% chance or so of a margin of victory in that lean Democratic ranking to tilt Democratic ranking of 0 to 5. They have a 25% chance of a 5 to 10 win for Ossoff. A 10 to 15% is around an 11% chance. Collins actually winning almost has about a 21% chance by winning it 5 points or under. So it is possible Collins could end up pulling out this race based on the odds here, but they overwhelmingly favor Ossoff. So by that margin, we'd put Georgia at a lean Democratic ranking, puts the Democrats up to 46. Now we'll go to North Carolina. North Carolina, despite having a retiring Republican incumbent, more likely to go blue than even the state of Georgia is with the Democratic incumbent. Roy Cooper at 81.5% chance to win. So you could argue actually New Hampshire, based on the forecast odds, is slightly more competitive than North Carolina is, where Cooper has a projected margin of 6%. So he's not even under that 5% lean margin. He would be in likely Democrat. Now, there is roughly about a 25% chance of a 5 and under win for Cooper in this race, but also about a 28.7% chance on their forecast of a 5 to 10 point win for Cooper. Whatley's chances of winning, 0 to 5, only 13.34% chance for Whatley to win. So by these numbers, even though Georgia would go in as lean Democrat, North Carolina would actually come in as likely Democrat. And that gets the Democrats up to 47. Next, we're going to go to the state of Michigan, where Michigan is a race that's interesting because the polling has shown a while that Mike Rogers versus Abdul El-Sayed. Rogers has been leading for a while, but in their forecast, they actually have Abdul El-Sayed now leading with a 64.5% chance of winning. And this really, if you listen to my analysis of this race over the last few months or so, this really isn't too surprising. As, again, I talked about Michigan, it's one of the most competitive swing states in all of the United States here. And in 2026 was expected to be a much more better night for the Democrats than 2024 was, where Rogers didn't win in 2024 in Michigan. It was very close, but he fell short there. In a more blue environment, it makes sense the Democrat would be favored. Now, it's still a close race at Democrat plus 2.4, about a 30.3% chance of that happening, about a 23% chance of Rogers winning there. Abdul El-Sayed is about a 22% chance of 5 to 10% here, but the margin is about 2.4%. And that changes going back to, they even had Rogers leading by a little bit back in the beginning of May. And you can see on the odds of winning side here, it's roughly been a 50-50 race between Abdul El-Sayed and Mike Rogers for a while, with Rogers even leading back in March. Now to being a little bit more spread out, 65 to 35 for Abdul El-Sayed in this race. So at 2.4%, we could put Michigan into the lean Democratic category. That puts the Democrats up at 48. Next, let's go to the state of Maine. So Maine right now, this is a Senate race. It's probably one of the most talked about in all the United States. Susan Collins only has a 56.5% chance of winning, which obviously is good for her. She has more likely to win than not. But look at the margins here. It's a 1 point projected margin of victory, about 30.92% chance, 27.18% chance of that same result, but on the Democratic side for Graham Plattner. So it's very, very close here. This race is clearly coming down to under 5 points no matter what here. For the sake of the video now, you have to put it at 1 point and tilt Republican, but does that mean that automatically, because it's a 1 point win for Collins right now, Plattner cannot ultimately come back and win here? Definitely could be the case. We're going to do that more after we go through each state. We'll come back here and kind of play through the scenarios. But Maine right now is currently a tilt lead for Susan Collins. Next, we're going to go to the state of Ohio, where Ohio is shaping up to be very, very competitive. John Husted has even a smaller chance of winning than Susan Collins right now. 54.6% of the vote, or 54.6% chance of winning, for Husted over Sherrod Brown. The projected margin here, only 0.8% for Husted over Brown. 26% chance or so, 26.6 of Husted winning 0 to 5. Nearly about 25% chance of Brown winning 0 to 5. It's an incredibly close race. You can see here in their simulations, the odds of winning have just totally tanked for Husted. On June 10th, he had roughly about 78% of the simulations where he won. Now it's only down to about 54%. So clearly the direction of this race has been moving in Sherrod Brown's direction over the last few months or so. But still, 0.8% falls under 1 point. Ohio would go into the tilt Republican category. This puts Republicans at 49, Democrats at 48. And sort of similar to the 2014 Senate elections, the state that put them over the top and got them over 50 was the state of Iowa. Iowa right now for the Republicans looks kind of similar. Ashley Hinton has 77.6% chance of winning. Her projected margin of victory currently right now is 5.3%. There is still a 15% chance, though, of Josh Strick pulling out the win here, but the odds are more in the favor of Ashley Hinton to hold on and win this race. That would put Iowa as likely Republican. And again, if you're waiting to see for the part of the video where I say, well, how do Democrats get to 51 Senate seats and take the Senate, as soon as I fill in Texas and Alaska, we're going to start playing through those scenarios from there. So just hold on one more second. Next, we're going to go to the state of Texas. Ken Paxton, James Talarico. This Senate race is very closely watched and talked about. They have Paxton with an 83.1% chance of winning. And the polling side of things, there's a lot of undecided vote at 44.5, 42.7. So clearly a lot of undecideds still to go in Texas. But they have Paxton defeating Talarico about 6.5%. There is roughly about a 25% chance it's 0 to 5 for the Republican, about a 29% or so chance it's 5 to 10 for the Republicans. Talarico only has about a 12.3% chance of winning it 0 to 5 for the Democrats. And the odds actually got closer around the end of May, beginning of June, where it was roughly about 68-32 or so for Paxton over Talarico. It's gone back up to 83-17. So it's still going to be a close competitive race, but they currently have it for Paxton as likely Republican. Finally, we have the state of Alaska. In Alaska, this is going to be Dan Sullivan versus Mary Peltola. Sullivan currently has a 66.7% chance to win against Peltola. Margin of victory, only 2.4% though. A 34% chance of a 0 to 5 win for Sullivan. Peltola has about a 24% chance of a 0 to 5% win for her. So even though the Republican has the advantage here, it's definitely a race that could potentially flip in the right scenario, but still Sullivan has the lead here in lean Republican. So based on PollsMax current forecasting odds here, the Republicans currently are keeping the Senate in 2026 at 52 Senate seats. Democrats are at 48. But now we start looking here and say, okay, well, this is what the forecast map currently shows. What can the Democrats do to flip the Senate? Well, you have to look first, I would say, at the two tilt states in Ohio and Maine, both of which, according to their forecast odds, have a 1% margin of victory for the Republicans, Susan Collins and John Newstead, or under. Could both of these states end up flipping? Well, it's an interesting conversation because when you talk about the state of Maine, and we can go back on here as well and pull up this race, Maine's a very interesting state because it's typically a more Democratic state at heart. In the general election, we can even see their most recent results here. It voted for Kamala Harris against Donald Trump by about 6.8% in 2024. It voted for Joe Biden by 9 points in 2020. Now, it was only a 2.9% win for Hillary Clinton in 2016, but look at the numbers. 46.3 for Clinton, 43.5 for Trump. Gary Johnson and Jill Stein took a good amount of that vote away in third-party voting. In 2020, Trump only went up about 0.1% from his 2016 number. In 2024, where Trump did better pretty much across the entire country, Trump went up about, 1.3% from his vote number from 2020 to 2024. So it's more of a situation of Maine being a pretty reliable Democratic state at the presidential level. At the Senate level, though, Susan Collins won by 8.5% in 2020, which is very much a shock to many. In 2014, she won by 36.2%. Now, per Maine election law, they do utilize ranked choice voting if no candidate breaks 50% on the first round. They call it the initial election results, the first round of results. Now, Collins got 50.4%, Gideon got 41.9%. I would bet almost anything that if Collins got like 49.9% and then went to ranked choice voting, it was going to be a much closer margin of victory than that 8.5% number ultimately suggests. There was another candidate in the race getting like 4 to 5% of the vote, and I think a lot of that vote would have gone to Gideon and not Collins, given that 2020 ended up being a very strong night for the Democrats, where Joe Biden won the state by about 9 points. But obviously that didn't happen, and now for 2026, we're really kind of just guessing of, okay, where do we go from here? But it's showing a very close race where Collins is currently leading only by about 1 point over Graham Plattner. In the state of Ohio, Ohio's a little bit more nuanced. It's a lot more of a Republican state at the presidential level. It's one of the more Republican trending states in the Trump era of any form of battleground. It went for Trump by 8 points in 2016, 8 points for Trump in 2020. So even though the margin only shifted 0.1%, Trump actually gained on its vote share from 2016 to 2020. Trump going from 51.7% up to 53.3%. Now, Clinton got 43.6%, Biden did get 45.2%, but in 2024, Trump even expanded on his vote margin some more, up to 11 points, 55.1%, Harris getting 43.9%. Now, the Democrats' saving grace in this race is Sherrod Brown is perhaps the only Democrat that can win a Senate race in Ohio in 2026. On that same election where Trump won the state by 11.2%, Brown lost to Bernie Moreno by 3.6%, but he got 46.5% of the vote, and Moreno only got 50.1%. Based on the polling that we've seen thus far, this race is clearly shaping up to be more close to that Moreno race than the Trump 2024 race. And prior to 2024, Brown did have a very strong track record in the state of Ohio at winning re-election. He defeated Republican Jim Renacci by 6.8% in 2018 and defeated Josh Mandel by 6 points in 2012. Now, it's going to be an election environment that favors the Democrats more similar to 2018, but you're facing against a appointed Republican incumbent. Now, that is important. An appointed incumbent is not the same as an elected incumbent, so that is, I think, one potential reason why you said it's not doing as strongly against Brown in this race as, say, maybe a Republican incumbent that was elected instead of appointed. He was elected lieutenant governor. He was not elected senator, though. And that could be a very important distinction in this race. So in terms of the 2026 Senate map, if we're looking at places where the Democrats can say, okay, the current forecast is 52-48, how do the Democrats get the Senate majority? Well, the first two states I would say that are watches as potential flips after holding Michigan, North Carolina, or holding Georgia, Michigan and Georgia, and then flipping North Carolina, the Democrats, I would say, have to flip Ohio and Maine. If the Democrats can do that, and we'll just put it in tilt Democrat for now, Susan Collins loses to Graham Plattner, Sherrod Brown defeats John Husted. It gets the Democrats to 50 Senate seats. Republicans are at 50 Senate seats. The Democrats, seeing as Vice President J.D. Vance, who's a Republican, breaks all ties in the Senate, Democrats need to flip one more Senate seat to get the majority. So what's the most likely state? Well, Montana, I think all options of Montana flipping are essentially gone as long as there is the Democrat and Independent in that race. Iowa, the polling is showing it to be a tight race between Hinson and Turek, but polling in Iowa is always kind of historically wonky. If I'm the Democrats, I wouldn't really be banking on Iowa being the state at the Senate level to flip to the Democrats. The governor's race is going to be a complete dead heat. That one can go Republican or Democrat. The Senate side, I think it's more likely we see the Republicans hold on there. So you're looking at 3 remaining Senate seats from there: Nebraska, Texas, and Alaska. And Nebraska's an interesting state because Dan Osborne did do very well in the Senate race against Deb Fischer in 2024. He lost against Fischer by only 6.7% on the same election where Ricketts defeated a Democrat by 25.2%. So it's a very strong performance, and he's currently projected Ricketts to beat Osborne by about 4.8%. So it's certainly competitive in Nebraska, but it's sort of right around that same margin as Iowa is, where you can see here that Iowa is currently projected a margin of 5.3% for Hinson versus Turek. It's possible for the Democrats to win these states, but I would say it's a little bit more of an uphill battle. So I really think for the Democrats getting that deciding state after Ohio, for me it comes down to Alaska and Texas. Now, Texas, the margin of victory is actually more bullish on Ken Paxton than Nebraska and Iowa is as well. I'm not sure that ultimately ends up happening when all the votes come in, though. The polling and the forecast are showing two different things right now. It does have about a 25% chance of it being 0-5 for Paxton, only about 0-5 on the Democratic side, about a 12.4% chance. So they're clearly more bullish here. The amount of undecideds in the race for Texas should be kind of a warning sign for Ken Paxton. He's only polling at 44.5% in the state. So, and he's only 1.8% lead. So I think Texas certainly has the potential to flip. But again, I'm not totally sure. Alaska, though, I think is the Democrats' probably best case of getting that 51 seat. Paltola currently only leads over Dan Sullivan by a little bit, but it is a lead of 0.4%, considering Sullivan has been leading really this entire time, aside from tying over the last, 2 weeks of the end of May and beginning in June. Now, for the forecast, It's the closest of these states that we have here at Republican plus 2.4% at 34.14% chance of that happening. 23.88% chance of Peltola to win by 0 to 5. That's where I think things kind of get interesting here. For president, though, it's been a pretty reliably red state, over 10 points for Trump in 2016, 2020, and 2024. For Senate, it was only competitive in 2022 because Murkowski and Tshibaka were two Republicans running against each other. Sullivan won by 12.7% in 2020. Now, it was competitive back in 2014, where Sullivan defeated the Democrat Begich, I believe it was Mark Begich, by 2.1%. But Mary Peltola was able to win a House seat in 2022 against Sarah Palin and Nick Begich in that race. It was a close one, I think like 2% of the vote. Or so, maybe that might be wrong. It might be 10% when it was, once it went to Palin versus Peltola in the general after the special election, I think it might have been like a 10% win. But Alaska is a very interesting state. It's not really Democrat at the presidential level, but it can be down ballot. And looking at the Senate chances here, I would say the state that's most likely to flip to give the Democrats their 51 seat would be the state of Alaska. Because Alaska kind of falls under a similar category of Ohio, where it's more of a likely Republican state. I wouldn't really say Democrats have a chance of winning it at the presidential election in 2028, but it's a state where there's a very strong Democrat running in Mary Peltola, kind of like Sherrod Brown, that similar scenario. Now, Dan Sullivan is an elected incumbent senator, so I think that gives him a leg up over John Husted in terms of winning that race. That's why he's a 2.4% margin to win, and Husted's under 1 point in Ohio. But I do still think Peltola represents the Democrats' best chance of getting that 51st Senate seat. If for some reason Alaska goes red and the Democrats have to find somewhere else, I think then you put Texas, Nebraska, and Iowa back in the conversation. But of those three states, again, you'd probably have to bank on Texas being really unpopular for Ken Paxton to give the Democrats and Talarico a chance of winning there. I just don't see Nebraska and Iowa really going blue here. Nebraska, it's trended a little bit to the Democrats in some recent elections here in 2024. The state itself voted for Trump by 20.5%, but the first district moved to the Democrats. The second district is becoming more of a Democratic-leaning place, so it's possible, but I think the Democrats' best chance to get that 51st seat would involve the state of Alaska. Again, it would probably be under a 1 point margin of victory, but based on the latest forecasting polls and predictions for the forecast, Democrats getting 51 Senate seats, for me, involves the Democrats holding Georgia and Michigan, and New Hampshire and Minnesota as well, and then flipping North Carolina, flipping Maine, flipping Ohio, and then you have to find a way to win one of Alaska, Texas, or Nebraska, and I think Alaska is the most likeliest state for now. That's currently what I think for the Democrats' map to the majority in 2026. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, though. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think of this map? What do you think of this video? Leave all that down below there. For now, though, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate if you get like and subscribe, as it helps push my video out to more people on YouTube that may be interested in this video like yourself. So I'd really appreciate if you could do that. For now, though, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in a future video.